Let's face it, as coaches, we spend hours obsessing over drills, tactics, and physical conditioning. But if you've been doing this for a while, you know the real challenge of managing a youth sports team goes way deeper than that. It's about psychology, group dynamics, and understanding your athletes as actual human beings. The bad coaches ran out of tools the moment the technical stuff wasn't enough. When they couldn't solve the problem by explaining the skill again, what came next was yelling, name-calling, treating players differently, not being fair, not being emotionally regulated. The good coaches were different in one clear way. They built relationships. They had emotional intelligence. They communicated. They were experts in more than just the sport. They were experts in the people playing it. As a youth sports coach, your role is much broader than the title suggests. You are a sports expert. That part goes without saying. But if that's all you are, then when your technical knowledge runs out, the only tool left is yelling. An educator and pedagogue. Every lesson in sport is also a life lesson. The best coaches make that explicit. They help children see what they are learning beyond the game. A team leader, your ability to lead well determines whether the environment is safe and productive or whether it slowly breaks down. An incompetent leader at the top can produce conflict, exclusion, and violence within a group. A motivator and supporter. You have to understand that each child is an individual. If you motivate and give feedback the same way to everyone, you will reach some of them and lose the rest. A guardian of well-being and safety. If no one holds this role, group dynamics can deteriorate fast. A communicator, not just within the team, but with parents, referees, and club representatives. How you communicate with children also models how they communicate with themselves. If you call a child stupid, that becomes their inner voice. That voice follows them. A bridge between parents and athletes. When this relationship breaks down, you get interference, distrust, and children caught in the middle. A health promoter. I injured myself badly during my career because no one taught me how to take care of my body. I had 2 knee surgeries. My back was damaged. No one talked to us about recovery, sleep, or nutrition. When a child twisted an ankle, our coach would say, "Tighten your laces and play until it goes cold." That is not just wrong, it is harmful. A role model. An athlete who wants to grow and develop will outgrow you if you are not a good example of the person they want to become. Not perfect, but genuinely trying. The current education system for coaches still puts around 70 to 80% of training time on technical knowledge. That is improving. But for youth sport, where the vast majority of your athletes will never become professionals, where your real job is to make them fall in love with sport and learn through it how to live well, that balance still needs to shift. Your main role is holistic development. You are shaping the whole person, body, mind, and character. Why athletes leave sport, and what you can do about it. No matter how good you are as a coach, you will lose athletes along the way. Understanding when and why gives you the best chance of reducing those losses. There are 3 predictable drop zones. The first is around 5th or 6th grade, when school starts to get more demanding. The second is the transition to high school. The third is university. These moments are natural pressure points. Sport starts competing with the rest of life, and some children choose differently. But the most common reason children leave is simpler. They stopped having fun. And fun doesn't mean goofing around. Fun in sport is the feeling that you are gaining something, that coming to training and leaving are different, that you belong to the group, that there is something here that matters. When that feeling disappears, children find it elsewhere. Right now, that usually means their phones. We are competing against that, and we have to be honest about it. Every group has a structure, whether you can see it or not. Learning to read that structure quickly, in the first 5 minutes with a new group, is one of the most practical skills a coach can develop. There is a framework that describes recurring character types through animal roles. The goal is not to label children, but to know what you are looking at and what to do with it. The monkey is the disruptor, restless, making noise, pulling attention away from the session. The instinct is to confront them directly, but that usually makes things worse. Instead, give them a task, a small responsibility, physical movement, something that channels the energy rather than fighting it. More importantly, find what they are genuinely good at and name it. When a child feels seen for something real, they naturally settle. The peacock seeks attention and arrives convinced they know everything. They can take over a session if you let them. The approach is to give them just enough spotlight, acknowledge their contribution, and then firmly redirect the floor to others. Do not shut them down harshly. Just do not let them run the room. The deer is quiet, agreeable, and often more capable than they show. They will not speak up unless you make space for them specifically. Do not push them to the center of the group. Build it slowly, in smaller or one-on-one moments. Their contributions when they come are often the most thoughtful in the room. The dog is confident. They respond well to a specific invitation, a moment of spotlight, and often have a lot to offer once they feel they have permission. The hedgehog is the default pessimist. Everything is a problem, nothing will work. They are not usually trying to undermine the group. They are trying to improve things. But left unchecked, their negativity can color the whole room. Acknowledge what is valid in their concern, then redirect toward what is possible. The silent leader is the most valuable and hardest to spot at first. This is the person who does not seek attention but earns it naturally. When things go wrong, the group turns to them. They have a clear sense of fairness and a quiet authority. Find this person early. Give them responsibility. Not as flattery, but because their influence is already shaping the dynamic. You want it working with you. A practical warning. 2 or 3 people will appear to be leaders in any group. Be careful which one you elevate. The most visible one is often not the right one. The right one is usually the person others instinctively look to when something goes wrong, not the person who draws the most attention. Giving responsibility to the wrong person can destabilize the whole group. One useful practice: rotate leadership at each training session. Give every member of the group a turn at responsibility. It teaches leadership through experience, and it shows you clearly how each child handles power and pressure. Building a team that trusts itself. Good teams become great teams when their members genuinely trust each other. That trust is not an accident. It is built deliberately through the environment you create and the activities you design. Start with a simple concept that is worth stating directly to your athletes. The strength of the team lies in each individual. When one person is struggling, when someone performs worse in games than in training because of nerves, how the team responds in that moment shapes everything that follows. If teammates respond with critical comments or visible disappointment, the pressure on that person increases. Their next performance suffers more. If teammates respond with genuine support, the opposite happens. The person returns with more confidence, tries harder, and grows. This is not soft thinking. It is practical. A team where mistakes feel safe is a team that performs better under pressure. Help your athletes understand this logic, in those exact terms, and they will treat each other differently because it makes sense, not just because they were told to. 2 exercises worth incorporating. The competition versus collaboration game. Divide the group into 2 teams with different instructions. One team is told to compete. Each individual should score as many goals as possible. The other is told to collaborate. It does not matter who scores, only that they help each other and enjoy the process. After the game, swap the instructions. Then ask them what each experience felt like from the inside. Children consistently report that collaboration feels different, lighter, more connected. That realization is something they carry, finding similarities. Put children into random groups, not by friendship or ability. A simple method: count to 5 around the room, then group everyone who said the same number together. Give each group a sheet of paper and 1 instruction. Find as many things you have in common as possible, but only things you cannot see. Not hair color or what they are wearing. Things like having a pet, being the oldest sibling, being afraid of the same thing. Children who rarely interact discover they are far more similar than they assumed. That shift in perception changes how they treat each other in training. Every child in your group is different. That is obvious to say, but coaching as though it is true is harder than it sounds. Children have different learning styles. Some understand by watching. Some need to hear the instruction clearly. Some, and this is common, only understand something once they have felt it in their body through repetition. If your only teaching method is demonstration, you are already losing part of your group. Motivation works the same way. Some children respond well to a raised voice and a challenge. Others shut down completely under that kind of pressure and open up only in an environment of encouragement. Some are energized by competition, others by collaboration. Your job is to figure out which is which, and then use that knowledge. This is why goal setting matters, and not just team goals. Individual goals. Sitting down with each athlete, understanding where they are, and agreeing on what they are specifically working toward. When a child knows their own learning point, they have something to aim for. When they do not, training is just repetition. Pair goal setting with regular, honest feedback. Children who receive no feedback do not know where they stand. Over time, not knowing where you stand feels exactly the same as not improving. And that is when motivation dies. When giving feedback, use the sandwich approach. Start with something genuine and positive. Place the correction in the middle. Close with something that reinforces the person's progress. This is not about softening the truth. It is about keeping the athlete open to receiving it. Training journals are a practical extension of this. A simple record where athletes note how they felt mentally before a session, whether they worked on a specific technique, how they rate their own performance. It builds self-awareness over time and gives you a shared record of patterns to discuss. Beyond the sport, stay curious about their life outside training. How is school? What is going on at home? What do they care about beyond the field? A coach who knows those things has far more to work with than one who only sees the athlete. And remember, every behavior has a reason behind it. A child who is disruptive, withdrawn, or suddenly disengaged is usually responding to something. If you understand the reason, you have somewhere to begin. Parents are not a problem to manage. They are your most important allies outside of training. Everything you build on the field is either supported or undermined at home, and that relationship starts with trust. Build trust proactively. At the start of each season, hold a meeting. Present your goals for the year. Explain how you work and what you value. Let parents see you before a problem arises. Do not wait until something goes wrong to introduce yourself. Parents become difficult when they feel excluded, uninformed, or when they observe something in your coaching that concerns them. And sometimes those concerns are legitimate. Yelling, name-calling, inconsistent treatment, ignoring injuries, parents will notice these things. If you are coaching with integrity, transparency works in your favor. If something is wrong, transparency gives it a place to surface before it becomes a larger conflict. Once trust is established, set clear expectations together. What is appropriate behavior at training and at games? How should communication happen, and through which channels? When possible, involve the children in these agreements. So the rules belong to everyone, not just the adults. The goal is a home environment that supports what you are doing on the field, rather than working quietly against it. As a coach, you are often one of the first adults outside the family to notice when something is wrong with a child. That is a significant position. Signs of anxiety, depression, burnout, or overwhelm often appear in sport before they appear anywhere else. In changes in attendance, mood, performance, or how a child interacts with teammates. If you are paying attention, you will see things that others miss. Your role is not to be a therapist. You are not expected to diagnose or treat anything. But the culture you create around mental health matters enormously. Small moments, an offhand joke about anxiety, a dismissive comment about someone needing help, quietly tell children that this is not a safe topic. And when the topic is not safe, children hide their struggles until they cannot anymore. Build connections with professionals you trust, a physiotherapist, a school counselor, a psychotherapist. Know where to refer and make that referral without shame or drama. You can also proactively offer your athletes access to expertise, workshops for parents on nutrition, injury prevention, recovery. These are all part of being a health-aware coach. There is a distinction worth making between mental toughness and mental resilience. Mental toughness, the capacity to cope in demanding situations, to stay focused and determined under pressure, is real and valuable. But the concept has a shadow side. When toughness becomes the frame, the logic can quietly become, if you are not tough, you are weak. And that logic has been used to justify pushing children through limits they should not be pushed through. Controlling, shaming, applying pressure under the name of building character. Mental resilience is a healthier concept. It does the same practical work, building athletes who can face challenges and recover from setbacks, without implying that needing support is failure. Building mental resilience in young athletes means several things. Normalizing stress, fear, and pressure. Children need to understand that nerves before a game are not a warning sign. They are a natural biological response. Educate them about what is happening in their bodies. When children understand that their reactions are normal, they stop fighting themselves and start working with what they have. Teaching self-regulation skills. Breathing exercises, grounding techniques, visualization, movement-based regulation. These are trainable skills, not personality traits. Practice them regularly in calm conditions so they are available under pressure. This is important. You cannot do focus and attention training with a child who is not calm first. Calm the nervous system, then work on focus. That is the sequence. Developing presence and focus through practice. Exposing athletes to challenges gradually. Growth happens at the edge of comfort, not far beyond it. The goal is to find each athlete's growing edge, difficult enough to develop something, not so overwhelming it shuts them down. Push too hard and they collapse. Not enough and they stagnate. Creating space for open communication. An athlete who can tell their coach they are struggling is more resilient than one who hides it. That kind of openness only exists when the coach has built the relationship and the environment that makes it possible. Supporting a sense of control, choice, and agency. Resilience is connected to the belief that effort matters. Coaches who give athletes genuine choices, involve them in goal setting, and make visible the relationship between work and progress are building something deeper than technique. Everything we have covered today leads to one question. It is worth sitting with regularly. What kind of athlete and what kind of person do I want my athletes to become because of me? Not despite you, not in spite of the environment. Because of you.